Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. The anticipation of our trip to the remote cabin in the Alaskan wilderness had been building for weeks. As soon as we had booked the Airbnb, we started planning and preparing for our adventure. We were a tight-knit group of friends who had known each other since childhood, and we were all eager to escape the stresses of our everyday lives and enjoy each other's company in a breathtakingly beautiful setting. As we drove up the winding road towards the cabin, I couldn't help but feel a sense of exhilaration. The crisp air and the scent of pine trees filled our lungs, and the occasional glimpse of a moose or a bald eagle only added to the thrill of the moment. We chatted excitedly, talking about all the things we hoped to do on our trip: hiking, fishing, stargazing, and maybe even seeing the northern lights if we were lucky. When we finally arrived at the cabin, we were struck by its rustic charm. The wooden exterior was weathered and worn, but the warm glow of the lights inside made it look welcoming and cozy. We eagerly unloaded our bags and began to explore the space, taking in the comfortable furnishings, the well-stocked kitchen, and the spectacular view from the large windows. One of our first tasks was to start cooking dinner. We had brought a variety of ingredients with us, and we were excited to try out some new recipes. As we chopped vegetables and stirred pots, we laughed and joked with each other, enjoying the simple pleasure of cooking together. We opened a bottle of wine and toasted to our adventure, feeling a sense of camaraderie and closeness that only comes from being in the middle of nowhere with your closest friends. As the night wore on, we settled into our respective rooms and tried to get some sleep, but I found myself unable to shake a feeling of unease. The cabin seemed to be full of strange creaks and moans, and the silence of the surrounding forest felt oppressive and foreboding. Despite my unease, I eventually drifted off into an uneasy sleep. The next morning, we woke up early and set out on a hike through the woods. The air was crisp and refreshing, and the sound of our footsteps crunching through the leaves was soothing. As we walked, we marveled at the stunning beauty of the landscape, with its towering trees, babbling streams, and snow-capped peaks in the distance. After a while, we returned to the cabin. After a day of hiking, my friend Adnan decided that we should explore the basement. The air was thick and musty, and the dim light from our flashlights barely illuminated the space around us. As we cautiously stepped over piles of debris and broken furniture, we stumbled upon something that would change the course of our trip forever. At first, we thought it was just another pile of rocks, something that had been left behind by the previous occupants of the cabin. But as we got closer, we realized that there was something hidden beneath the rubble. We cautiously began to move the rocks aside, our hearts racing as we tried to anticipate what we might find. And then suddenly, there they were, two human skeletons lying in front of us. The bones were yellowed and brittle, as if they had been hidden away in the darkness for decades. Our minds reeled as we tried to make sense of what we had found. Who were these people, and how had they ended up hidden away in the basement of our cabin? Soon after the discovery, the atmosphere of the cabin took on a much more sinister tone. Every creak and groan seemed to take on a new significance, and we couldn't help but feel like we were being watched. We called the cops and told them what he found. They later arrived and cordoned the house in tape. They took our statements and contacted the owner of the property, who later came and an investigation started. We left that night and stayed at a motel down a few miles away, but to this day, what I saw that night still haunts me. I had always loved the idea of weekend getaways, a chance to escape the stress and chaos of everyday life and recharge in a new and exciting environment. So when I stumbled upon the listing for the perfect Airbnb in the countryside, I knew that I had to book it. I spent weeks counting down the days until our trip, eagerly anticipating the peace and quiet of the rural retreat. I made lists of everything I wanted to do: explore the nearby hiking trails, curl up with a good book, and cook delicious meals with my friends. Finally, the day arrived. We piled into the car and set out on the long drive to the Airbnb. As we wound our way through the countryside, I felt my excitement building with every passing mile. When we finally arrived at the house, I was taken aback by its grandeur. The property was expansive, with rolling hills and towering trees as far as the eye could see. The house itself was a sprawling mansion with ivy-covered walls and a grand entranceway. We were greeted by the owner, a kind of older man who showed us around the house and gave us the keys. As he left, I felt a pang of apprehension. There was something eerie about the way he had looked at us, as if he knew something that we didn't. But I pushed the feeling aside and focused on the weekend ahead. We settled into our respective rooms and started planning our activities. Everything seemed perfect. The house was beautiful, the surroundings were breathtaking, and we had all the makings of a fantastic weekend ahead, or so we thought. As the first night at the Airbnb approached, I started to feel a sense of unease. There was something about the house that made my skin crawl, something that seemed to whisper sinister secrets just beyond my hearing. Despite my growing apprehension, we spent the first day of our trip exploring the area, taking in the stunning scenery and indulging in some delicious food. But as night fell and we settled in for the evening, it felt like something was off. As we sat around the fireplace in the living room, telling stories and sharing laughs, I heard strange noises coming from the other end of the house. At first, I tried to ignore them, but they grew louder and more persistent as the night wore on. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself from the group and set out to investigate the source of the noises. As I crept down the long, dimly lit hallway, I felt a sense of dread creeping up my spine. And then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, in a room that I was certain had been empty just moments before, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. At first, I thought it was one of my friends playing a prank on me. But as it got closer, I realized that the figure was too tall, too still to be human. And then it turned its head, and I saw the glint of two dark, menacing eyes staring back at me. I screamed and ran back to the living room where my friends were waiting, but they didn't seem to believe me when I told them what I had seen. They laughed it off as a trick of the light or a figment of my imagination. But I knew what I had seen, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something dark and sinister lurking in the shadows of the house. As we settled in for the night, I found myself unable to sleep, plagued by visions of the figure in the hallway and the feeling of something cold and clammy breathing down my neck. The next day, I woke up early, feeling restless and on edge. I decided to take a walk around the property, hoping that some fresh air and exercise would help clear my mind. As I made my way through the woods surrounding the house, it still felt I was being watched. Every time I turned around, I saw nothing but trees and shadows. When I got back to the house, my friends were already up and getting ready for the day's adventures. We decided to head into town and explore some of the local shops and cafes. As we walked through the streets, I couldn't help but feel that the people we passed were staring at us with a mix of fear and suspicion. It was as if they knew something we didn't. Then an old woman approached me and asked if we were staying in that old country house off the road behind the forest, to which I replied yes. Her eyes hollowed and her breath deepened, after which she exclaimed that a family was brutally murdered in that house 30 years ago. My heart froze. I couldn't believe it. I told my friends, but they just ignored it and said the old lady was crazy and trying to scare us. As we sat by the crackling fireplace, enjoying the warmth and each other's company on our final night, I was still shaken by the murder that had taken place in this house, but a part of me still doubted what that old woman had said. Maybe it was the way the wind whistled through the cracks in the cabin's walls, or the creaking of the floorboards that seemed to echo louder than usual. Whatever it was enough to make me feel uneasy. Suddenly, the fire flickered and went out, casting the room into complete darkness. We all jumped in surprise. The power was also out, and I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. Then one of my friends screamed. I could hear the terror in her voice as she yelled. We all jumped to our feet, and I quickly turned on the flashlight on my phone to inspect the scream. What I saw made my blood run cold. On her back was a massive bloody scratch, as if something with sharp claws had attacked her. We all screamed and grabbed our things and left the house. We slept in our cars for the night at a gas station, but not before attending to my friend's wound. In the morning, I wrote a bad review for the place, but it felt silly to write that we were attacked by an unseen entity who clawed my friend's back. No one would believe us. I always thought it would be fun to rent an Airbnb in a quiet, secluded neighborhood with my wife. It would be a chance to relax, unwind, and just be together without the hustle and bustle of our everyday lives. So, when we found a quaint little cottage nestled among the trees on the outskirts of town, we jumped at the opportunity. The cottage was just as charming as the pictures on the website. It was a small 2-story house with a cozy living room, a kitchenette, and a bedroom upstairs. The backyard was lush and green, with a small patio area perfect for enjoying a glass of wine in the evening. I arrived at the secluded area with my wife, eager for a peaceful weekend. As we were unpacking our bags, I noticed that someone kept staring at us from the backyard of the house next door. It was unnerving, but I didn't think much of it at the time. That night, we settled in and were watching TV when we received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end of the line was distorted, but the message was clear. "I'm going to kill you," the voice said before hanging up. My wife and I were terrified and couldn't understand what was happening. We immediately called the police and reported the incident, but they couldn't do much without more information. We tried to calm ourselves down and assured each other that it was probably just a prank call, but the events that followed would only escalate our fears. Just as we were starting to doze off, the doorbell rang. It was the middle of the night, and we couldn't imagine who would be at our door at that hour. I made my way down the stairs, all the while hesitant and on edge. I grabbed a vase that was in the hallway and I opened the door cautiously, but there was no one there. We searched the area, but found nothing. As the night progressed, we heard strange noises coming from outside. We were afraid to look out the window, but we could feel someone watching us. We stayed up all night, too scared to sleep, and when morning finally came, we found that all 4 of our car's tires had been slashed. We were trapped in this secluded neighborhood with no means of escape. We were so frightened that we contacted the Airbnb host immediately, but he didn't seem to be much help. He simply said that it was probably just a neighborhood prank and that we shouldn't worry too much. But we couldn't help but feel like we were in danger. We tried to leave the house, but we were too afraid to go out into the backyard, where the person had been staring at us. We felt trapped and helpless, unsure of what to do. We remained trapped in the house that night. The tension between my wife and me was mounting, and we were becoming increasingly paranoid. We heard strange noises that night, and we were convinced that someone was watching us. Finally, it was dusk, and we quickly grabbed our things and called a taxi. We were able to leave the Airbnb and return home. We never found out who was behind the terrifying events, but the experience left a lasting impact on us. We never felt safe again, and we always made sure to research the neighborhoods we visited before booking any Airbnb. After we returned home, we tried to forget about the incident, but it lingered in the back of our minds. But for some reason, we still felt like we were being watched, even when we were in the comfort of our own home. It was a constant source of fear and anxiety. Eventually, we decided to try and track down the person who had made the threatening phone call. We hired a private investigator, but they were unable to find any leads. It seemed as though the person had disappeared without a trace. We reported the damage on our car, and the police said they'll look at any camera footage for evidence, but unsurprisingly, they found nothing. As time went on, we slowly began to move on from the experience. But the memories of that weekend continued to haunt us, and we never forgot the feeling of being trapped and helpless. We had vowed to never let our guard down again, and we always made sure to take precautions when traveling to new places. The incident had left a permanent mark on us, and we knew that we would never be the same again. Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.